To give a little background, the Civil War was in 1861. So from then until the end of the century, there was not a single Democrat from the North or the South that voted in any legislations in favor of the civil rights movement. To put that in simpler terms, there was nobody in office to go to bat for African Americans. So Woodrow Wilson is an important president when we talk about protests and riots because his last 4 years of his terms saw more anti-black race riots than any other time in America. With all this going on, he had agents focusing on gathering intellect and information on African Americans instead of the racist white Americans. So the last 3 years, especially in Woodrow's terms, came two extremely important riots. There was the 1919 Chicago riot and the 1921 riot in Tulsa. 1921, the riot in Tulsa, Oklahoma, is not, fun fact, it is not in history books. If you guys hear about it, all power to you. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, white supremacists dropped dynamite from airplanes onto a black ghetto. This ended up killing more than 75 people, and it destroyed more than 1,100 homes. Bombs were dropped because white Americans no longer wanted African Americans in their neighborhoods or in their towns. They started threatening black newcomers with death if they remained overnight. They began calling these towns the sundown towns to keep black Americans from moving in. These sundown towns often kept out Jews. In the West, they excluded Chinese people, they excluded Mexicans, they excluded Native Americans, really anyone that they deemed a person of color. And then when this started happening, lynchings became public and they were going unpunished in public. J. Edgar Hoover started weeding out black FBI agents to the point where in the 1930s there were only 2. And by the early 1960s, there were none. 0 African American FBI agents. A little background on J. Edgar Hoover. He was a white supremacist who thought that the 1954 Supreme Court decision outlawing racial segregation, which is Brown versus Board of Education, was a terrible error. He helped Kentucky prosecute a Caucasian civil rights leader for selling a home to an African American family in a white neighborhood. And he also initiated a campaign in 1963 to destroy Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights movement. So, yeah. Okay, so moving on to the nitty-gritty of this video, which is about protests, after all that background. So, we have to start off with the Montgomery bus boycott, which began after your girl, Rosa Parks, we all know her, was too tired to get up from her seat on the bus and walk to the back of the bus so that a white passenger could sit down. Since she refused to get up, she was arrested. So the bus boycott began December 5th, 1954. Initially, it wasn't going to fight the segregation laws. It was only challenging the government to be courteous, hire black drivers, and to change the rules to a first come, first served kind of rule when it came to seats on the bus. And then ultimately, they decided to challenge the segregation laws. It lasted 381 days, and it ended on December 20th, 1956. And that is when the segregation laws changed and buses were integrated. Even though the buses were not segregated, the bus stops still were. African American passengers were getting on the bus, and there would be snipers outside of bus stops sniping into the buses. A shooter actually ended up shattering both legs of a pregnant African American woman.
I watched them kill one of my brothers and put him in the dirt.
In January of 1957, 4 black churches and then also homes of prominent black leaders were bombed by white supremacists, the KKK. Dr. King, Martin Luther King Jr.'s home had been bombed, but they defused it before it went off, and 7 Ku Klux Klan members ended up being arrested. Skipping ahead to 1961, the Freedom Riders were integrated bus drivers challenging the Jim Crow laws. They had a group of African American bus riders and white American bus riders that were going to ride on these buses together as a peaceful protest. They planned for police brutality and brutality of people that weren't happy. They practiced getting beat by people that weren't happy with the protest. They practiced jumping in and protecting each other in these situations and what could happen and what kind of violence could come about, which is really gross that you would even have to prepare for it, but hey, it's my opinion, I guess. Moving on. They ended up getting attacked by white segregationist mobs, and there was widespread media coverage of all of these assaults. So with the media seeing everything that was going on, it kind of helped push President Kennedy and his administration to intervene in the situation. President Kennedy ended up having to deploy federal marshals to protect these black protesters because they were in so much danger. Also under President Kennedy and his administration, there ended up being footage of civil rights protesters being hosed, attacked by dogs, children being harmed, all kinds of things like that. That's footage that we kind of skip ahead in our history books too, was the hosing and these peaceful protests turned violent by who? Ding ding ding, white supremacists, but hey, we'll keep going. That ended up initiating the March on Washington on August 28th, 1963, where Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is my experience with protesting, civil rights movements, things like that. So I started protesting Saturday, May 30th, 2020. And it's a hard experience to put into words and to express without you being there. It's very surreal. It can be scary. You go down there with the intentions of being peaceful 100%, and it's very difficult when you have situations where the aggressors are the people who are supposed to protect you, and that's exactly what happened. And looking into and researching protests and riots in the past, what I see are these race riots that begin violent, and they're coming from white supremacists and members of the Ku Klux Klan and people who are racist and have hatred towards people. I mean, the whole point of this educational channel is to show you the whole story has not been given. It has not been given. And it's sad. You go down there, we march, we talk, there's speakers. A huge thing that stood out to me was when we were speaking our first day. It's 10 o'clock in the morning, and there's snipers on top of the state building ready to shoot at protesters, peaceful. We're standing on the sidewalks, just talking, maybe not even saying anything. We're on the sidewalks, not doing anything, and we get tear gassed and maced and smoke bombed for nothing. Nothing. I will also drop a video for you.
We are here for answers. That's all we want. We just want change. We're trying to fight with y'all, man. This shit is correct. What are you doing? Right there. Wash it out, wash it out. Walk, you're fine, walk.
They're getting more aggressive and they're more forthcoming. I think rubber bullets are coming next.
Fight for nothing.
Alright, I'm in the corner of A and North High. I don't see anybody that's been hurt with the gas.
We have the right to protest on the sidewalk.
And there's so many aspects of these protests and things like that that people don't see, and there's a lot that they don't understand. And I think there's a lot of frustration that goes into these riots that happen after these peaceful protests. But a friend of mine who is also a Black Lives Matter activist, huge activist, and she really wanted an emphasis and an understanding from outside people that nothing in the past happened without violence. It may have started peaceful, you could have the best of intentions, but whether it's from retaliation or it's from supremacists who are angry, there's going to be violence. There is going to be violence. There's no way around it. And what we have to understand is we have to take all of that education, we have to learn it, we have to apply it into what's happening in today's time, and do the best we can to incorporate it into what we're doing now. If that comes to violence, then unfortunately that's what it comes to. But there's no time that you cannot go back in history and look at a protest or look at something and there wasn't any violence. There was always violence. It's always going to happen. A lot of people love to quote Martin Luther King Jr. We fail to also remember is Malcolm X. And we forget that he also had an idea of how we fight the system, basically. And although Martin Luther King Jr. believed that non-violence was the answer and to find self-respect is to integrate, what Malcolm X was preaching is that you can't you can't get smacked around. You have to fight back. So no one's saying that we have to fight, we immediately have to come out swinging. That's not how anything gets started. Nobody's coming into this as we have to come in swinging. But it's either you sit here and you turn the other cheek, you turn the other cheek, you turn the other cheek, and you continue to get smacked and pushed and bullied around in hopes of being respected. And you'll get some respect, but you don't get everyone's respect. Or you could come in and you can say, I'm tired of you beating on me, and I'm going to fight back. And then you're going to get respect that way, and you're going to gain some respect, but you're not going to get it all. Period. So you choose what side you're on. But what people also have to understand is, regardless of what side you choose, it ended in violence. Martin Luther King was shot and killed. Malcolm X, shot and killed. But regardless, the outcome, the goal has to be the same. And they had the same goal in the past. So now in the present, we have to also understand what the goal is. So I hope you found this video a little bit helpful, maybe. I hope somebody has learned something. I know it's pretty rough. I'm obviously still learning to get comfortable in front of a camera. I'm also getting used to I don't want to memorize these notes. I really just want to be real and talk about it, because that's what we're here to do, is talk about it. But I definitely will have more information. I'm definitely going to work to get better at providing this information in a timely and helpful manner. But I just want to make sure that, if not anything, you're learning something and someone can take something from this. Just something, just one thing. I don't have like a catchy phrase to start off because I'm like quirky and awkward, so